Welcome to Stormwatch by GreyNoise Intelligence. Each week, we drop the latest info on what's happening at GreyNoise, Census, and VulnCheck, take a look at a roundup of important and timely cybersecurity topics, toss out some expert opinions, and drop the occasional conspiracy theory. Today, we start with a really quick check-in on the Columbus, Ohio ransomware attack debacle to see if there are any adults in the room at City Hall. But our main topic features GreyNoise's own Matthew Remacle, aka Remy, who will take us along on a ride through his Bluetooth discovery journey with a first stop at a bonkers terrible flaw in a Soho firewall that eventually led to Remy discovering just how horrible the state of medical device safety and resilience is, thanks to horrendously bad software and design practices when it comes to Bluetooth. Perhaps we'll even get Remy to give us a look at his self-designed Bluetooth capture rig, which may have given him radiation poisoning a couple times. We'll also check in with the latest publications from Census, VulnCheck, and GreyNoise. And if time allows, we're going to opine a bit on just what the heck was up with SysAKev's DOS last week. But before we do that, first of all, it's great to be back with everybody. It's also great to have you back on, Remy. Appreciate you taking time to do this today. I know we're kind of in the middle of things right now. And we're going to start off with a little thing because we have a nice little fall question to get everyone going. And Remy, if I could start with you, what is your favorite fall fragrance, if any?
Any smell at all. I get terrible allergies every fall.
Oh man, no.
But you know, I do enjoy pumpkin spice kicking me in the face when I walk into Starbucks. It's an experience you got to have every year. So.
Fair enough. That's a shame you can't smell things at this time of year, though. It's a shame. Horrible. I'm going to go to Glenn next, so he can't copy off of anybody else. Glenn, good to be hanging with you again.
Yeah, I think, and you too, I guess I should say. And that's a polite thing to say.
I don't actually believe that, but that's fine.
Okay. No, for fall scent, I mean, it's like a mental game where you have, in the fall, you have the cinnamons and pumpkin smells. And then, you know, that kind of turns into the Christmas tree, pine, spruce, whatever smells for the winter holidays. So it definitely is the best time of year for sure.
Wow. Yeah, I do not disagree with that. This is my absolute favorite time of year. Himija, good to be back with you.
Good morning.
And I can offer the same question to you. What is your favorite fragrance at this time of year?
My favorite fall fragrance is the smell of like damp wood rotting and decaying, because I don't know how to describe it. That description does not sound very appealing, but like I'm a person who will go to Home Depot and just take deep breaths because it's so good.
That is
awesome. Valid.
Yeah, totally. That's a great one. And my arch TLS nemesis, Emily, how you doing today?
I'm good. I like that I've made my mark. I stand for something. So I think kind of actually similar to Images, like I love the smell of the woods, like physically being in the woods in the fall. There is something really kind of magical about that. And maybe it's more than just the smell. It's just kind of the whole experience. But like being on a trail with the leaves kind of turning colors and like, I don't know. There's just something really wonderful about that. It is.
So we have 2 votes for rotting things. Wood
maybe
and
3.
leaves.
Maybe 3.
And we have 2 votes for like fragrant cooking type smells. So what's Bob gonna do?
Well, we got maybe Overwatch is the tiebreaker. Overwatch, it's great to be back with you. What is your favorite fragrance? I love this all the time, but especially cinnamon and coffee. Ooh, those two together. Oof, that's a killer. That's a great combo. So I'm going to extend what Hemija and Emily said, and it's a specific combo of things. So at this time of year, the grass still grows. It's not voluminously, but there's still a little bit of grass growing up in Maine. And it's also the time of year when the leaves start changing color and falling. So when they fall, they begin to do decay. And then right after a rainstorm, you got the petrichor from the rainstorm with just this slightly still like alive moss with the grass and everything combined with the rotting leaves. And that combo it's evocative of so many childhood memories of going into the woods and stuff. And just even now, just hanging out there, I think it's weird that the smell of decay and death can be great, but it's kind of, I don't know. It's a sign of the time of
signifies
year.
like new things are coming, like the end of a cycle, like to look forward to the beginning of a new one.
Yeah, and for folks that are,
what was that word you used? Petrichor?
Petrichor, yeah.
Yeah, bonus Scrabble points for that one.
Right? I was like, no one else like jaw on the floor, like, okay,
I
Bob.
just googled it because I didn't know what it meant.
Bob knows a few words.
Yeah, a few. I mean, I can't say the ones I'd say to Glenn during the day, but that's all right. That's pretty cool. So we are going to turn this off before we get banned in more countries. I should point out to everybody that GreyNoise cannot be heard. I'm sorry if you ever travel to Belarus or Russia and want to listen to Stormwatch, you cannot. We are banned in Belarus and Russia. I think because of how dangerous we are, but it might also be due to copyright infringement of the music that I play.
I feel like that's an achievement.
Column A,
I'm
column B.
I'm not sad, honestly.
I'm putting that on my
about that.
profile.
Yeah.
I'll
yeah,
endorse you on LinkedIn for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to thank Emily for reminding me to do this. We have a podcast, everybody. I know we have some great people joining us today, some of the normal crew that joins us live. But you can listen to us async as often as you want. And last week's, if you did miss last week's episode on the I can scroll down on Andrew Morris's Noise Storms, it was bonkers cool. I got to listen to it. Most of it, I was in the middle of doing some migration stuff that we're doing here at work, but it was a great one. We got lots of great responses from it. Dig into it because we have links to data and all sorts of things. And I think we're going to do a community call later this week. I think Jordan's working out something with that. So hit us up if you want to talk about this more. It's really intriguing. The team did a great job. I was really bummed that I actually couldn't be part of it, but alas, had stuff to actually go
It's
do.
cool. People are sending us, like, they're looking through their data. They're sending us JSONs. They're having conversations. Like, it's definitely a mystery. The answer, who knows, but it's definitely a mystery, and it's kind of a fun little boondoggle, at least.
So, but before we get into the topic, some folks may not know who you are, Remy. So, could you please, actually, before we go to Remy, I'm just going to do a really quick update on Columbus. Like I said, I was going to do. So, if folks have been playing along at home, past few times we've been doing this, Columbus pulled a really stupid thing. They had a ransomware attack. They tried to cover it up. A researcher said, "Hey, this is actually unencrypted data, and we can see it." They tried to throw the law at that person. They did throw the law at that person, and now that person is free from the law, but can only talk to the city about what that person actually knows. This is, again, the quintessential way to not handle a cybersecurity incident in your municipality. So please, if you're involved in any way, shape, or form in that in your local governments, tell them not to be as stupid as the Columbus, Ohio people were. That is my opinion. That's not so much's opinion. I just wanted to get that out there for there. Remy, introduce yourself to the GreyNoise fam audience and Stormwatch Cam.
I'm Matthew Remacle. I go by Remy. Have the little rat icon. You'll probably see that around. I'm employed at GreyNoise, and I am the cybersecurity architect here. I am a husband, a father, and a hacker. I spend a large portion of pretty much every single night for years on end, 8 hours of work, and then 4 hours of hacking every single night. And today I get to talk about my special interests. It's a rarity that anyone decides to let the floodgates loose. So I'm very, very excited to talk about what is now a years-long arc of like everything cursed I found with Bluetooth, and where I've decided to pick up and try to fight for something that I think is a positive benefit for the community. So I'm very excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, and I can confirm, like, this has been a years long. This started way, way, way back at the beginning of the year with a simple little thing for a simple little firewall that has now exploded into what we're going to cover today. Glenn, what were you going to say? Apologies.
We have to remind Remy that there is a time limit on this because he will talk.
Yeah, the podcast goes 3 hours. 3 hours, right?
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Even then, you'd have to let him know.
A little bit. We will do our best to rein Remy in. So before we let Remy or start to interrogate Remy under the microscope, he's got a great blog. It's a huge technical blog. Lots of great details about all of his journey and how he did a lot of things. It's quite amazing that Remy was able to put this much time into this and be able to document it so thoroughly. So if you haven't read that yet, I mean, you don't have time to read it right now, but definitely use it as reading material after this, because I think it will fill in any gaps that we might leave here. And Remy, I'm gonna leave up some graphics that you'll just tell me to scroll down when you need me to scroll down them. But can you start with just talking about how your journey began?
Sure. My journey began probably around when peak COVID was happening. We were all indoors and I didn't have a whole lot to do. And I still have not the original one that I found, but I bought a duplicate of it. So this is a Fitbit Charge 2, one of the original smartwatches. And I think at launch time, these were somewhere close to like $100 each. And I had been walking around my apartment complex and I found one laying on the ground. And I thought to myself, I was like, I wonder if I could find the owner of it. And so I made like a small Twitter thread, and I was like, what if I took this device and I decided to like clone all of its attributes, and can I make something that impersonates this device, and then I can just wait to see when their phone connects to it, right? Because then clearly the owner's phone is probably nearby and I can return the device. And I was successful. I actually pulled it off. And I was like, okay, well, maybe we try to see if we can actually hack the watch. So I ended up buying one, and I did a brief foray into like trying to hack smartwatches and failed miserably. And so this was, I did fail miserably. I have 2 full blogs of just, I hit a dead end, but I learned a whole lot in the process. And I learned about, BT Snoop, which is a packet capture format specific for Bluetooth, originally written by Symbian. And that is actually what you can dump Bluetooth logs in a packet capture format from Android devices. And so I started touching on a bunch of different subjects and got into a really big arc of, okay, well, it's really, really hard to kind of do a survey of Bluetooth. And there's not a whole lot of people really working on Bluetooth security. The pool of people is actually incredibly small. In recent years, a big shout out to Zina Kova of Dark Mentor LLC, also Open Security Training 2. Very, very cool program. Very, very interesting individual. They keep a good log of Bluetooth security timeline. And if you look back over the past year, you're talking about a pool of like maybe 20 people. Most of them know each other. So like the pool is so incredibly
Sorry to
small.
interrupt. Why do you think that is? Like, why is it so niche, given that it's such a widespread technology?
Oh, it's a huge pain to work with. It is just abysmal. It's so awful to work with. It's a proprietary technology. So I think they just released their newest draft, which added 160 extra pages that like no one read the previous 600 anyways. Because what I found was, in looking at reality and looking at the real world, is like from the get-go, and I'll talk about this more in a moment, but from the get-go, you've got public addresses. So they've got a Bluetooth address that is public, isn't really meant to change. And then you've got random addresses, which are randomized device addresses for previously paired devices, so that you can't necessarily like uniquely identify an individual. In the real world, it's actually roughly 50-50 that public addresses, which aren't supposed to change, do, and random addresses that are supposed to change don't. So like from the very get-go of like, how do you see this stuff in the wild? Can you even see its frequency? You're 50-50 for like whether reading 700 pages of documentation even is relevant to your situation. It works by complete happenstance, and we're getting millions and millions more of these devices every single year. So because it's volatile and a huge pain to work with, that's why there's so few security researchers working with it. So yeah, that's kind of what got me into it. And also as working at GreyNoise, I have a big interest in unstructured data. So if you give me a large data set, I'm like, oh, let's go find the pattern. So like I have a personal interest in something pretty volatile to work with, go in, look for patterns, and try to like define a category, of be able to take something apart. So that's what kind of originally got basically me. Yeah, I think it's fun. Like something that is just, incredibly painful to work with, you can come back to it time and time again. Like it's just one of those gifts that keeps on giving.
Wow, like you just described every day with Glenn. Well, I appreciate that, Remy. Thanks.
But so one of the like the key things, this graphic here shown on the screen is a wonderful graphic. I really like it. So if you've ever done any sort of 2.4 gigahertz sniffing, so like Wi-Fi captures, cracking Wi-Fi, that whole thing, Wi-Fi channels, you've got channels that are set to frequency ranges, and they have a center frequency. And here on this graph, you can see Wi-Fi channels 1, 6, and 11. And in between there are Wi-Fi channels, but these are the ones that don't overlap, so don't create interference, and typically are the most common ones. And overlaid on this are Bluetooth low energy channels, and there's a whole lot more of them, as you can see here. Whereas with Wi-Fi, if you're trying to, sniff or listen or transmit on a certain frequency, you tune to that center frequency. Whereas with Bluetooth Low Energy, you have, I think, 37, 38 channels with 3 advertising channels. And one of the initial things that a pairing sequence will do is your device and the remote device will exchange something called a channel map, which is to say, we will be transmitting data on channels, 1, 7, 14, 1, 4, and 30 at certain timing frequencies. So this is a really interesting thing called frequency hopping shared spectrum. And what that means is if you're on like a metro train and everyone's got their wonderful AirPods headphones all in at the same time, it all kind of spreads out, right? Like you're not jamming each other. You're not getting any sort of like interference. And you can actually get a whole lot more devices communicating simultaneously. But for like adversary-based attacks or getting a capture of the data from a remote device, like listening in on it, you encounter some really interesting problems where if you don't have that channel hopping map, things get very, very difficult very, very quickly. You can't even analyze the data. You've got to figure out how to actually even see it in the first place. So frequency hopping shared spectrum, that's overlaid with Wi-Fi, and conveniently, we'll touch on this later, of like Wi-Fi channels can fit in between frequency hopping shared spectrum Bluetooth Low Energy channels. So oftentimes on your laptop, the same hardware chipset that does Bluetooth will also do Wi-Fi. And if you've ever been using high bandwidth Wi-Fi, like streaming on the internet, and you've ever seen like your Bluetooth mouse seemingly like stutter, where it seems like it's going a bit slower, that's actually what's happening. Frequency hopping shared spectrum is actually hopping in between those timing intervals of your high bandwidth streaming on a single frequency for Wi-Fi. So cool fun fact if you've ever seen that behavior.
That kind of just blew my mind right now, because yes, I have noticed that, and it is frustrating. I personally like Bluetooth. I have strong feelings about it because of how difficult it is in general. That's really cool and really fascinating.
So that's the person with wired earbuds in right now.
I'm using them too.
Yeah, oh, see, there you go.
It's a wonderful technology, and it really is everywhere. So like to visualize this, this is cited with permission, Bob, if you can scroll to that next image, which is the wonderful waterfall chart here. So this is shared with permission. So like all these little dotty boys here, right? So this is frequency hopping shared spectrum. You can fit a lot of them in here. But we've got some labels in here for like Wi-Fi channel 6, which is, that's probably broadcasting from a geographically closer location, a stronger signal. And you can kind of see that bluish shadow of Wi-Fi channel 11, which is probably a Wi-Fi base station a little bit geographically further away from where this capture point is. But throughout all here, you get these nice little specks. And that's that channel map that I was talking about earlier. It's like all these things are just pinging off constantly. So typically with Wi-Fi, you fix to a center frequency, but with Bluetooth Low Energy, they're like, you can find me here, 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 here. And it's just a complete shotgun. And trying to capture that and really wrangle it is a problem from the very get-go, even before you get into any sort of analysis of what the payloads they're sending are, what that device is, what the manufacturer is, vendor, product, version, the whole shebang. So like, we've got a long way to go, and it's pain incarnate, but we're going to have some fun, right? So in kind of like several years of research and failing miserably, I came up with 3 primary targets that I wanted to at least try to approach. The first one is domain expertise needed to work with Bluetooth and radio communications in general is pretty hard. And I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be. I just am the person who is like, you know what, I'm going to dive in here and try to write some of this down and try to make it approachable. My end goal for all of this is to make it approachable so that someone else will step in and be like, okay, we can actually do something with this. I don't think I'm ever going to actually manage to enable policy changes that I want, but I think it's really, really important to try to remove barriers of entry to this area of research so that people can follow in my footsteps and take things further. Item number 2 is measuring the impact of security and privacy implications of Bluetooth is even harder. So like exactly like we said, the radio frequency hopping shared spectrum, like from the get-go, oh, it's painful. We haven't even made it to like what devices are out there. You've got to figure out how to like even interact with them in the first place. So I wanted to try to take away a methodology and framework of not looking at everything in Bluetooth in general, but to really focus on a best case scenario. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. The best case scenario, you know, if there is ever a bug or an exploit or a vulnerability found in a Bluetooth device, ideally you would be able to issue a firmware update, a software update, or some sort of patch for it, right? That's the best case scenario, being able to actually fix a problem once it's out there in the real world in any significant numbers. And by and large, a lot of these devices, you simply can't do that. They're just permanently broken. And there's no real way to kind of inventory those. I'm not super concerned about chasing that and trying to solve a problem I know can't be solved. That we've kind of made our bed and decided to lie in it on that front. What I'm concerned about is the things that we could actually have a potential to fix, the things that can actually be updated, that have interactivity. And so item number 3, which I've not actually made it that far yet, but I have the data for it. I'm very, very excited. The cybersecurity community primarily takes action once tools are available to provide quantitative and qualitative measures. And what I'm focusing on right now in the background, doing a lot of data analysis, is I don't want to provide tooling for, you know, offensive red teams, exploit everything, without also providing something to defenders. And what I've kind of settled on is we need a Bluetooth Low Energy URI that is an appropriate descriptor for a device or category of devices. Now, this is a tool, and it can be used much like a URI might be used in a nuclei template for saying, you know, we describe the system, we're able to throw an exploit for it, in as much as it can be used by a defender to say, if I find devices in my local vicinity matching this URI or this category of attributes, I know that that falls into the certain subset that may be affected by this vulnerability. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I've made it through 1 and 2, and it's a long story arc, but I'll kind of pause here and open up to any questions.
So what was your first device besides the watch then? Like, what was your first device that you really tried to do anything like clever to figure out what was going on?
So smartwatches are particularly fun. The smartwatch, the Fitbit Charge 2, was the first one that I ever really attempted. And it's just a tiny little module, but they really do pack a lot in. It's got a heart rate monitor, O2 monitor, really, really fun little device. But the second one that I ever really played with was actually around the time that my son was born. It was I believe it's actually FDA cleared medical device. It's one of these smart socks, if you've ever heard of them. Now, as a parent who has gone through the process, looking back, what I will tell you about these smart socks is they're not super, super, super accurate. But it did fire off one time, and we're very, very thankful for it because we did end up.
Wait, what is a smart sock? I don't know. What
these are very comfortable little things that you put on an infant child while they're sleeping. So it's a sock, and it has a little module that looks not too unlike this from the Fitbit Charge 2. And so it also measures heart rate and O2 levels. And so, you know, if they're sick,
vitals and such.
Yes. And while I won't claim that it was super accurate, because we did coordinate a lot of these with actual medical equipment, my wife is a nurse, what we did find was it was accurate enough for peace of mind as a first-time parent. So I will recommend these devices. If you're going to set down a child in another room and you're a first-time parent, you're having trouble like wide awake, like, oh, I hear them coughing. Are they alive? Are they breathing? Oh, you know, they're coughing or they're finally quiet. And you're like, are they okay? It's perhaps very, very calming to be able to know that you will get an alert on your phone if their O2 suddenly drops below 50, right? You know, that mental backs up. And so what I found was, one, don't mess with your child's medical devices. Your wife will get angry. So I did not do that, but I got very, very interested in terms of what
everyone.
I got very interested in what I could passively sniff out of the air in terms of recording these metrics between the base station and the smart sock so that I could, without interfering, receive only mode, kind of collect some of these metrics over time. So that was the second device that I ever really played with, in terms of like, I'm not actively attacking this device, but it is, you know, medical information, and how much can I kind of like sniff out of the air. Now, this was for personal purposes of like, you know, I kind of wanted to collect the O2 stats and be like, okay, what's the sleep schedule, right? So that was the second device. And then, you know, there's a place that opened up near us that really kicked it into high speed. I needed something to do with my son on weekends. So, you know, like many malls in America, they're kind of on the downturn. They bought out a massive space, and it's called the Bin Store. And it is just massive, massive wooden slop troughs of all the Amazon returns and unclaimed packages. And the way that it works is the shipping label, personally identifying information, is cut off. And you get these massive slop troughs. You can fill up a trash bag. Saturdays, every item's $5. Sundays, every item's $4, and on and on and on. So my son and I would just stroll through on a stroller, and while I may not be able to see the label of this device because of where they place the stickers that's been cut out, what I do recognize is the FCC logo, which means that that thing has radio communications. And so every single weekend, we would go to the store right after they emptied the slop troughs, and my son and I would collect up massive trash bags of everything that supports radio communications. So I have a cyber graveyard that I've been punching at for about 3 years now. And so I've learned quite a lot in that process.
I've been the recipient of one of those trash bags too, and there's a lot of really cool, fun stuff that you get in those things. It's also amazing just how much junk is made every year.
So I have a question.
Bluetooth water pump, barcode scanners. Like I have a slop trough back behind me.
So you said earlier that you made some comment about not actively attacking. I think it was the smart sock. I'm curious, have you turned to actively attacking various devices or technology?
Ooh, that you're
willing to talk about?
Attacking things, yes. And I have some very, very strong opinions on this. What defines an attack or malicious action? We'll talk about this a little bit later, but there was a Firewalla firewall. And so this is about $1,000 small home and office device. And I ended up finding 2 vulnerabilities in it for remote code execution. It took a lot of work. I ended up having to write a custom protocol at the application layer carrier and like did a whole write-up on it. But that is actually so much more insanely more difficult to get remote code execution than it is to like harm someone who uses the Bluetooth low energy medical device. Attacks have a broad range of like what the level of difficulty versus what the impact is. And I mean, if you break a computer, in most cases you can reflash it or reset it. But like I have a special spot in my heart for like people who don't necessarily have a choice, for like what improves their quality of life and the devices that they depend upon. My wife recently had a medical episode, and long story short, at the end of that, a pacemaker may be in her future. And so I care quite a lot about the implementations and security in medical devices. And what we're finding is, and I'm quoted in like a Bleeping Computer article, for Flipper Zeros, there was a Bluetooth low energy spam where they were spamming these frequencies, and like it ended up crashing quite a lot, these devices. That's not good, just from the get-go. And so I called this out and I said, you know, suspected Flipper Zero. It was never confirmed it was a Flipper Zero. And again, the Flipper Zero is not actually the problem here. It's just a device, right? I think flippers are really cool. But the core issue here is that Bluetooth is a radio. And so any radio jamming methodologies kind of apply here. So a Bluetooth low energy device, if it's a medical device, should not necessarily be receiving these frames. Like obviously you can saturate any sort of uplink. There is an upper bound to what you can do with radio, and you will fail in terms of like adversarial based attacks. But the bar for medical devices is actually so low that there's not nearly any complexity in terms of like protections for these people. And I'm very, very sad about that. a lot of these glucose monitors and a lot of these medical equipment will leave it where by default you're able to pair to these things. They're just wide open. Whereas, if I were to able to advocate for a single policy change, is that the FDA says if you are going to pair a device to a FDA cleared medical device that has Bluetooth enabled, there needs to be a hardware button that you have to press in order to pair a new device to it. Now, that's something you wouldn't need to do every time. If your phone's already paired, you're already paired. What should be implied is that if you're going to pair a new phone or some external attacker, it should make sense that you should probably explicitly allow them through a hardware-based button. And a lot of these chipsets actually already allow that. What's actually implemented is far, far worse. So special spot in my heart for Bluetooth medical devices, and just like how low that barrier is for like deeply, deeply alarming things. And what really brought this to the forefront and is covered in the Firewalla blog is like the exploits that I got in the Firewalla, those were just examples for storytelling narrative. They weren't particularly difficult to find. They were actually found automatically. And it was just a storytelling narrative. The real thing is like for the glucose monitor in question, a lot of people were like, oh, like, sure, there might be problems in Bluetooth medical devices, but like no one's actively going out there and like harming people. There's no motivation to, right? And what we find is there's actually an FDA class 1 recall where 224 people were injured by accident. And that's bad, right? Like people aren't necessarily doing that intentionally. We're actually to the point where by accident, these people are being harmed. And there's a wide range of what harm means, but that definition and classification, a class 1 recall is the worst kind of recall from the FDA. And so I tend to trust them. I think that there's a lot of work to be done here, and I care quite a lot about removing the barrier of entry to even have those conversations. So that was really kind of the driving motivations for this once I kind of got my bearings. I have the ability to collect a data set and say, in a best case scenario, kind of where are we at right now? And the answer is not very great at all. It's actually pretty bad and continues to get worse. So yeah.
Speaking of collecting, Remy, do you have your radiation poisoning rig near you?
I do. So that was going to be in the next section of like how we talk about the hardware. So let me drop.
I have a question before we transition. So like an argument that I've heard quite a bit when it comes to especially implantable medical device security is that people would rather prioritize, patients particularly would rather prioritize availability. So they'd rather that if they were like stranded in Antarctica and like had a medical penguin come up, that they would be able to, figure out how to like change this, like how to modify the settings and give them life-saving care. So do you have like thoughts around that and how we can balance that?
I do have thoughts, but I want to be very, very clear that I am not a medical expert. And I'm not even going to guess at what the correct move is to be. And this comes from like, I may have said something different in the past, and some of my friends who have talked to me in response to that question, I may have said some different things in the past, but really what I've settled on is like, I'm not a medical expert. I don't think I should have a strong opinion when it comes to medical care. But I do feel like I'm qualified to have the conversation in regards to the technical aspects of things. And so that comes back to, if I could change one thing in terms of policy for like FDA cleared medical equipment, is that there be a hardware-based button that, you are explicitly allowing someone to remotely interact with these medical devices. That I feel is in my wheelhouse to advocate for in terms of what rolls up to quality of care, quality of life for a patient on a variety of symptoms and a variety of medical devices. I am at the point now where I know better than to speak at all on that subject. That is not my forte, and I'm not going to toe that line. That was a great question. I feel very, very strongly about that in terms of like, that's the question where like, I know I shouldn't be answering that because medical professionals do quite a lot of, medical professionals do a lot of training, and I do not. And yeah.
I feel like it's
We should
very
make sure.
admirable that you take that stance. I suspect there might be other researchers in other disciplines who would kind of easily fall into like, oh, well, I can also talk about this too. And I think it's very admirable that you draw this line of like, this is a little bit beyond my area of expertise. Like I'm not going to comment. So like, I think that's an important thing to point out too.
Mm-hmm. So touching on that in terms of like ethical and safe conduct. So measuring stuff in the real world, Bluetooth devices, they're low energy. So often your battery powered devices may only beacon or be visible to a scanner every 3 minutes or something like that. If they have another device paired to them, they may not beacon ever at all unless they're disconnected. They may only advertise themselves initially after the device is booted up. So following a power outage, you may see me hopping in the car and putting the pedal to the floor going, I need to get it all. Like there is so many factors that cause biases in the data that like you really have to be opportunistic and ready. So what I kind of landed on was custom hardware.
So by that, you mean like when there's a power outage near you, one of your first thoughts is, I need to get in the car with my Bluetooth rig to go record stuff. Is that
oh, hell yeah.
Christmas, gotta catch them all.
I'm excited for Christmas morning and, you know, Bluetooth operated Halloween lights. I'm excited for these holidays for a completely different reason.
So it's like a non-visual Pokemon Go, basically. Like it's like,
yeah.
Okay.
And
so there's really storm chasers. There's storm chasers, and then there's Bluetooth chasers.
Yep, okay. And I'm not the first one. Weigel, if you're familiar with Weigel at all, Weigel is a very, very cool framework. For the data points that Weigel collects, their ingestion system, and this is where I will make a statement that might anger some people, but I have the data to back it up. They provide a count for the number of Bluetooth devices, identifying like a unique device, that they've observed, and it's in the like millions and millions and millions, right? Of the attributes that they collect in their data set, I assert that they do not have enough data points to accurately deduplicate or discern individual devices to produce that count. Which isn't to say that like their best guess is better than my best guess. It's just calling that out in terms of like, we needed to do better. We needed to collect more data points, and that really gave rise to, okay, well, I need to do custom hardware. This is a wonderful, wonderful board of someone that I talked to at DEF CON, Lonzig. They created a project called the Wi-Fi drone for collecting data for Weigel. Now that was for 2.4 gigahertz frequencies for Wi-Fi. And I thought to myself, well, the same exact chipsets that fit on this board also fit on, you know, they also do Bluetooth. So how many can I fit on here? So I ended up getting a few of these boards. And as I was ramping up for this project, my wife says, with good reason, and there is a history here, she said, no soldering in the house. And I said, all right, well, that complicates things. So we did a little bit of a sweep. And
next episode, let's get Remy's wife on here.
Oh, so this, don't tell her that this is actually probably technically more unsafe, but it's all in a nice plastic case here. So what we have here is 14 ESP32S3. So these are dual core chipsets. They have these screw block terminals, no soldering, that are put together, and they have two different power sources. And so I can give a close-up of one of these chipsets with one of these small fractal antennas. They're about the size of a thumb, and they have extremely small footprints and are powered over USB-C. Now, these units themselves run about $5 each. They're actually incredibly cheap. And so buying 14 of them, what I would say is buy about 20, because I fried more than a few in the process, and you're probably going to get a dud at that count. So in general, buy a few extra. So I rig up this kit and I say, you know, the initial fingerprint of distributed systems, I wanted to be able to capture as much as possible. So when you're connecting to a Bluetooth Low Energy device, you can't necessarily connect to another one simultaneously. So I wanted something that could kind of like shard out and swallow everything in a surrounding area. So you need some sort of shared rate limiting, and rate limiting became very, very apparent. My wife actually walked into the house one day and was wearing a Bluetooth enabled cardiac monitor. And that was, I'd already implemented rate limiting, but that was kind of like the eye-opening moment of like, oh, I need to be like, sure, I'm conducting myself okay. Because I've been in my cyber tech slop pit of like, stuff I bought from the bin store. I've been playing with that for months in my controlled area. But you never know what's going to walk through the door. And so in the initial kind of like hardware design, yeah, you can build this kit for about $100, and comparable full spectrum swallowing kits, those are thousands and thousands of dollars. So this was my approach, but I probably spent half of that article talking about the importance of rate limiting, not only for like data collection purposes, but for safety. If you even attempt to connect to a device and you fail, never retry and like ban that. So between all these devices, they sync up on a coordinated spectrum. And I can actually display some of that here.
We need to do a GoFundMe to get lining for Remy's office so that all these signals just one big Faraday cage.
And one of those lead aprons, I think, too, for him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I've got Bluetooth headphones on, and we're going to see how this works. But this kit is actually throwable. In as much as like I have it powered by this 10,000 milliamp hour, typical battery block. And this is from Anker, love Anker. And so this will actually keep this entire device.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. I actually just really love Anker tech. But so this is plugged in and it's actually not doing anything yet. Rate limiting. Despite the shared rate limiting table, it's all orchestrated by a single device, which I'm actually holding in my hand. It's not connected at all. So if I boot this up, this has a data store on it. And what it's going to do is it's going to automatically identify all of the devices in the background, go through, and what it's doing is it's initializing all of them. It's setting them up in an index so that they will have no overlap in the devices that they try to capture. They all have their own rate limiting table. And under perfectly ideal test case scenarios, this rig can connect to, identify, and analyze 1,500 devices every 3 minutes. So for about $100, I think I hit the target. And as you can see right here, I'm already getting quite a few as it's going through and indexing them. So this is just swallowing everything in my nearby area. Very, very fun. And this is all logged to an SD card in a JSON lines format. So you can just dump it straight from the SD card and do that log analysis. And so I get a lot of devices. I think I'm approaching like 1.5 million devices seen in the wild right now. And that's advertisements. I have enough attributes to deduplicate. And what you end up with at the end is like, okay, of the devices I've connected to, we get into GAT. And
okay.
Before we get there, the next image comes into play.
Yeah. So before we get to that image, okay, you don't have 1.5 million devices in your. Okay, you might, but you don't have 1.5 million devices in your house. You don't have 1.5 million devices in your neighborhood. You probably don't even have that many like in your surrounding area. Where did you get 1.5? Where'd you get logs for 1.5 million unique devices?
Where has this thing gone?
Yeah, seriously, what's going on?
11-day road trip all across the northeast of the U.S. So that was quite fun. It's merged in with the logs of I was at DEF CON a few years ago with the initial kind of exploratory device framework with these M5 stack ESP32s, where I talked to Lonzig about their implementation. And if you remember DEF CON from that year, there was people saying they were getting weird Bluetooth alerts on their phone, and there was the whole hubbub and all those articles. For those of us that were prepared, we were watching and knew who they were. So it's a little fun fact. The group of people who are watching are very, very small, and they tend to all end up knowing each other. So DEF CON all across the East Coast of the US. My wife planned out a trip to go to Europe for 30 days. And carrying around a backpack with a bunch of antennas sticking out of it, probably not the best idea. But you know what is a lot more convenient is one of these. I love LilyGo tech too. They create all kinds of cool devices. So this is actually the exact same chipset and the form factor of a USB drive. It has a little LCD screen, has a little integrated antenna, And actually inside the USB plug here is a micro SD card for logging. And the power draw on this thing is actually so small, it can run 24/7 for about 20 days straight. So I just plug in this battery pack, toss it in the backpack, and you can quite literally take it anywhere. And so I collected quite a lot of data doing that as well. So trains all across Europe, having quite a blast, and seeing all the sights and sounds, and not really worrying about trying to hit that mark of opportunistic visibility in these devices, because they may only beacon once a day depending on circumstances. They are low energy, but if you're able to see them and collect attributes on them, you actually get that bigger picture, and a lot of things start standing out. And so we'll probably go to that next graphic now.
I'm with Imager right now. I feel like Remy's wife is so tired and we need to talk to her. Like we're going on a road trip. No, not for the family, but I'm bringing my backpack.
She knows why I get excited.
It could be both.
I am not a history buff. I'm not big into architecture, but like I will be standing there grinning ear to ear, like ha ha ha.
She probably knows
the like audio guided tour. I'm swallowing all their data. Like, yes, that's
she can
that's
talk
why I get
really
excited.
doing anything that he doesn't really want to do, just as long as he can bring his toy.
The funniest thing is it's got the little LCD screen, so my son loves it. So like she'll be getting ready in the hotel room and she'll come outside and my son's just walking up and down the hallway watching the numbers tick up, and she's like, oh my gosh.
Just make it like a little Tamagotchi or whatever, where it
Oh my
has
gosh,
like
he started young.
It has a little rat icon on it too. He loves it.
Oh my gosh.
Remy, I'm so glad you're not evil.
I just like data. I just really like data. So what we have here is actually this is, back when I was doing the original beta testing, these data sets were collected from this one when I originally went to DEF CON. And so they were extremely inefficient. But even then, what you see here is, and there is some redacted information, but some of the things that may be out there. As you can see, the value read from these service and characteristic device trees, you've got pay $47.03. You can probably guess what sensitive information may be going through this device, right? Wide open, no security. It's just right there. And so if you go to the next image, we touch on, you should hope. Bill's hearing aids. Probably not great that someone who potentially depends on these in order to navigate the world around them, increase their quality of life, that these things are just kind of wide open for anyone to mess with. I think that's awful, and I think that we can do better. Sure, shoot.
It's more of a joke, but so my mother will not turn her hearing aids on. Can this remotely enable them? Because if so, I would like to chat. It's okay. Let's move on.
Possibly.
Okay.
You could probably drive someone crazy if that's your objective. You can probably turn it on, off, and a bunch of stuff. But yeah, so the next graphic is it's the one with a lot of the word cloud, if you can go to that one. So we collect all this data for years and years and years, and we keep adding on to it, and we define a structured database schema, and I get into big data. And I'm not a math person, but I do like unstructured data, and it's quite fun because you can try a lot of different approaches on this. So I made a lot of graphs, and I was like, you know what? This might be one of the best ways to communicate this. So this is, if you ever use the GNU strings utility, it takes arbitrary binary blobs, and it looks for any sequence of 4 or more ASCII characters, and it pulls them out. And so this is actually every data attribute, manufacturer beacon data, the MAC addresses, any red attribute values, and this is just all grouped together. And this is labeled by volume. So here what you see is, Lime scooters. They're everywhere. And because they have a massive battery pack, they're actually spending quite a lot of energy beaconing out constantly. If you walk up to a Lime scooter, you don't want for the extremely power efficient pairing process of, purchasing that scooter to take 2.5 minutes, right? So they're beaconing quite fast. You're going to see a lot of them in the data. The other one right at the top there is Apple Inc. And this is actually funny because despite how large it is, I actually banned Apple from the data collection 2 years ago. And it's still that big. You are leaking so much data from your Apple device. It is uncanny.
Is that just because there's so many Apple devices and it's doing so much Bluetooth transmitting?
There are so many Apple devices. They are all doing Bluetooth transmitting. And it turns out that if you don't ban them outright, even a collection rig of this size and scale will spend almost all of its time indexing Apple devices. You will never get any variety because there is such a large footprint. Now, I'm not even the only one. I'm not even the only one to encounter this problem. Xenokova, in their similar setup, ran into the same thing. You will see 4C00, the manufacturer ID for Apple, banned from their data set as well. Apple is polluting the airwaves, and you are leaking so much data constantly. It's everywhere.
When you say ban, you mean like blacklisting from your collection, not like
blacklisting from the collection. At a certain point, as you can probably tell from like the size of the word, for every given piece of Apple hardware, I'd already indexed it a year and a half in that like I wanted to be able to get some variety, but I kept hitting Apple devices. And so all of us right now sitting in our rooms, like I have an iPhone. My wife has an iPhone. I know a lot of us probably have iPhones or Apple Watches or AirPods, and it's everywhere. They're all beaconing constantly. And so at a certain point, you're like, I probably covered all the unique device fingerprints for hardware. I'm probably good. I want to exclude this. But in here, you also see things like Apple Inc., iPhone, Lime, as in the Lime scooters, Polar H1. That is a electric vehicle, very, very common in Europe in certain places, similar to like Tesla, where they use like the phone keys, where the app you can unlock the cars. And so you see quite a lot of other things in here. I think up and to the right, you might even see the German spelling of server room. Lots and lots. It's a very fun graphic to scroll through. And so some of these things were only seen once. Quite a few of them were seen like thousands and thousands of times. But if you are going to take a task of, I want to exploit Bluetooth, what should my largest target for impact be? We're actually pretty lucky. iPhone and iOS. A device that can receive firmware updates. Yay! That's actually really great news for us, right? But if we look, I think it's a little bit down and to the left. I'm not going to be able to see it. But Firewalla P is in there for Firewalla Purple, which is something that was logged quite a bit while I was sitting next to my desk. And this is actually the subject of remote code execution. It just happened to be there. So this is a fantastic little device. And if you read the blog, you'll know why I'm actually covering up the QR code on the back. But this is this is a very fun little device. I actually really, really like Firewalls. Again, I'm not trying to like trash on the company. It is a fantastic little device, but it made for a perfect storytelling narrative of like opportunistic identification of devices. So how do you uniquely identify a device? I had this Firewalla P popping up in my device logs all the time, but I had millions of other devices. Manual analysis, you're not really going to like catch this thing, right? So I wanted to ideally be able to take and combine the data from this collection set and be able to immediately identify what that device is, how to interact with it, what the vendor, the product, the version, potentially even the entire API to interact with this thing over its binary protocol. So how do I get to that point? About a year and a half of learning how to reverse engineer and do control flow graphs and Android APKs, which turns out into the next thing. So if you pull up the next image in line here, it should be the wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So this is actually the Firewalla APK. So what we've actually done is we've taken all of the Java classes for Android Bluetooth, which is a HAL, a hardware abstraction layer. And this is how Android APKs are able to interact with Bluetooth and connect to another device.
Remy, before you go, not everyone is an actual like I'm going to like steal stuff from the internet nerd. What's an APK?
A APK is an Android package. I forget what the K stands for. It
doesn't matter. The acronym doesn't matter. Just tell people what it actually is.
It's the apps that get installed on Android instead of on iOS. I think iOS is .app.
Yeah. So
I honestly don't know.
so what everybody that isn't doing what you're doing, they go to the Google store or whatever, and they tap the icon, it loads, and that when it loads, it's loading that APK onto their system.
Correct. And
Gotcha.
so
Okay, cool.
the collection of APKs at a large scale, we're just going to glaze over that. If you are an academic researcher, which I was not able to get access to the collection, part of why I'm glazing over the subject of how do you acquire such a collection of APKs. If you're an academic researcher, there's a wonderful organization called AndroZoo, and they have millions and millions and millions of APKs for academic research. So if you are in academia and you wish to pursue a similar subject, you don't necessarily have to do the legwork of scraping all these APKs. There's organizations that are already collecting these data sets for analysis. However, in my case, I needed to self-source them, and I ended up with a collection of my own. What you see in this graphic is the relationships between Java classes specific to Firewall, to the Firewalla, and how they relate to the hardware extraction layer for how your Android device connects over Bluetooth. And what we find is the ability to trace these connections and say, all right, for each of these classes, they may contain a UUID, a unique identifier, which describes a remote device and how we're going to interact with it. And when you have multiple of those, you end up getting a quite unique device fingerprint. And so as I was building this data set, you get a combination of like 7 or 8 UUIDs, and you're like, okay, this describes this Android APK by this vendor with this product and this version, and you can actually directly decompile the entire API to interact with it. You can dump all of this immediately, but you have to be able to join it to a remote device. And as part of something that this piece of hardware does is for any device remotely around you, it'll index all of those service and characteristic UUIDs. And so I built up this API, and I said, as I'm actively scanning, try to remotely identify devices around me. And it worked incredibly. And that's how I found the vulnerability in this Firewalla. Now, it turns out that this Firewalla firewall has a Bluetooth Low Energy undocumented management interface that only appears when it has a loss of internet connectivity. As I was working on this local API, my internet had blipped out, and I hadn't realized it. But that ephemeral, opportunistic scanning and immediate identification, I was able to recover, and it shows a measurement rating of 95% accuracy, that I was able to immediately say, there is a Firewalla device in my vicinity. It is running a compatible version of this APK. I'm able to immediately dump the entire API to interact with it. And if there are any known vulnerabilities for this device, which I identified, I'm able to immediately associate those with this remote device and say, there is a device in my vicinity from this product, from this vendor, running this version with this API that I can exploit. And so we've kind of bridged the gap. Step 3 is to take all of this data analysis and kind of tier it in terms of like what segments in a URI best describe a system. And I want to try to ease that barrier of entry so that all of these things are immediately approachable. Now, you may not have a massive collection of APKs, but if someone's already processed that data, which there is a collection from 2019, shout out Xenakova. If you look at their Bluetooth printing, a very, very similar project, which is mentioned in the second blog in the series, there is a collection of the dumped UUIDs from a 2019 data set. So you don't need to collect all these APKs. You can actually start immediately and load a lot of this data set. You don't necessarily need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to do custom hardware. You can actually just buy things that are $5 a unit off the shelf, or even just do a single unit, which is $20, and it's as complicated as plugging in a USB drive is. With these two things, I want to ease that barrier of entry so that you as an end user can just sit down and say, okay, what are all the Bluetooth enabled things near me, and how do I describe them? Like how do I describe not only a vendor, a product, a version of the actual application running, but potentially even the chipset, because there are chipset-based vulnerabilities for like Qualcomm, et cetera, as we just saw. So things around the house that might have Bluetooth, your sprinkler system, this is a Bluetooth-enabled hose system. Your smartwatches, the first smartwatch I ever did There's also, they're dirt cheap now. This is an ID 208. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of these in your local vicinity. You've got Bluetooth enabled barcode readers. This is a cheap knockoff, but what you will see is there's fully enabled ones running full x86 kernels at your local grocery stores. They're everywhere. And so, you know, grocery stores handle money. I don't know, various other things. You've got Bluetooth mouse. So Logitech mouses, fun fact, the name for them, and name is an attribute of the advertisements. If you look at them in a typical app, you'll see it says Logitech mouse. But if you peer in behind the scenes and look at the actual data on the frame, what you'll see is Logitech mouse actually has a null byte at the end, indicating that that chipset and that SDK that was used to program that device may be using a null terminator, such as a C-style string does. So there may be a SDK or chipset-based vulnerability for memory corruption hiding out there that otherwise you have no way of describing. My personal favorite of things floating around the house. I mean, the Firewalla was there, but also even as we're looking around the house, this is a blood pressure cuff. There's a little button for Bluetooth. I don't know if you can see it there, but like, I grabbed this pile literally walking downstairs to get on this call. You have a lot of stuff in your house that is Bluetooth enabled. You may not even know it's Bluetooth enabled. You may not be able to find it unless you are scanning for it constantly for the better period of a month and the power goes out. And so as that initial like boot sequence goes through, it may only advertise Bluetooth for 5 seconds and then it goes, okay, you know, I've paired up. I'm good to go. My robot vacuum upstairs, EcoVax vacuum. There was a DEF CON talk of someone who said, yes, you can hack EcoVax vacuums over Bluetooth Low Energy as part of like the initial pairing process. Your Wise smart cameras for, you know, monitoring the outside of your house for home security, etc. One of those vulnerabilities was found in a Wise camera where, yeah, it's over Wi-Fi. And they use custom binary protocols for the streams. It was in pwn to own. Like people have done incredibly complex write-ups of like binary and memory corruption-based exploitation and custom binary protocols. But what apparently most people missed is, as part of the initial device setup, if you stick a semicolon in the SSID field over the Bluetooth Low Energy interface, remote command execution. It's just plain command execution. Like no complication whatsoever. You just shell in. So in terms of automated binary analysis frameworks, a lot of remote code execution, you'll find a socket hook and you'll trace it back to like wherever you get a remote code execution sync, be that a system call or finding, you know, some sort of memory corruption like stircat with unbounded length. But because a lot of Bluetooth interfaces either directly go into a hardware abstraction layer or they go through dbus, such as on like a Linux system, tracing those calls gets extremely complex. And so a lot of times it looks like a dead end. But when you peel back and look under the surface, when you know a device is local to you that, you know, you didn't necessarily know had Bluetooth in the first place, what you will find is a lot of these things are wide open and they're just not prioritized for vulnerability research because they're not necessarily on the internet. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about them, particularly in the medical space. And so that's my personal vendetta of like big arc. I have a lot of data. I'm doing a lot of analysis now, and I just really like Bluetooth. But if I could change one thing in policy, give us a hardware button. Like even before you get to remote code execution, even before you get to like disrupting or stealing privacy sensitive medical information from these devices, before we even have those conversations, just give me a button that doesn't let everyone through the front door by default. I feel like that's pretty reasonable to ask. So that's my
thinking about the implications of a power outage, because you can obviously force that externally, depending on, I don't know about where y'all live, but most homes you can turn the power off outside for safety reasons. So like for privacy, stalking, personal safety, like that's where my brain goes as far as ways to really like real world
and to extend that, Glenn, that was awesome. And like to extend that, Remy, what's local? So because it's Bluetooth Low Energy. I mean, like I'm used to Glenn being like the low energy thing, but now it's Bluetooth. And so but
is it 33 feet?
How far away is local? Because I think people may not really understand just how far you can be to do the stuff that you've been doing?
Does it depend on your altitude?
It depends on what you're trying to capture. So as I said before, like there's like 700 pages of current Bluetooth Low Energy spec. If you're going by the spec, let's call it 20 meters, right? You know, generic answer is 20 meters. And that is with receive and transmit, establishing a flow connection. If you want to push it further than that, fantastic. Bluetooth, I think it's version 5.1, 5.2. You get what is called phi-coded connection. So you have typically, Yagi antennas. Oh, yes. Now, for receive only, yes. Transmit, you might need a little bit more amplitude that these little $5 chipsets are not going to be able to push. You need external amplifiers, etc. But Yagi antennas for receive only, if you're just trying to collect this data, yeah, you can do a lot of fun. But phi-coded, you can get miles with the right amplitude. And there's quite some fun stuff. I think there was a proof of concept by something in space. I forget the exact article of it, but I know Bob sent it to me. I was like, yeah, I saw that. Consumer grade Bluetooth hardware was used. I think they used a phased array of consumer Bluetooth hardware and did literal space communications with it. And it was like, okay, yeah. So what is the range on Bluetooth? Your generic device, let's call it 20 meters. It depends on how much power it's pushing behind that receive and transmit, how big its antenna is. You can control some of that distance yourself by using a larger antenna for receive only like Yagi, or adding amplifier for your transmit strength. But there are upper limitations before swapping to a different protocol, such as phi-coded connections, which are lower bandwidth, but you can get further distance out of them. And so a lot of cool things can happen when you kind of break that barrier. But generically, about 20 minutes or 20 meters.
So, and the other one is like, so not everyone is a hardware wizard like you are, even though you're banned from soldering at home. I might feel that a little bit. Are there any like any easier ways for folks to begin to explore the Bluetooth world around them? Like if they have an Android phone or an iOS device, are there any apps they could load on there to give them an idea of all this mysterious stuff floating around them?
Yes, indeed. And so as I started this conversation with, of like frequency hopping shared spectrum, it's particularly volatile to work with. I'm going to start the conversation with holding up this. It looks like a little USB drive.
Let me zoom in first. Hold on.
I've got system blur on.
There you go.
So it just looks like a little USB drive. And so this is actually a NRF 5.2 XXX series chipset. They're quite cheap. This is the MDK dongle. You can pick these up on Amazon for less than $20. These are capable of what is called connection following. So they will listen for a device to beacon out its channel map. And if it is able to capture that channel map, what it will do is it will passively follow that channel hopping spectrum so that it's able to observe both pieces of connection. You can actually dump in Wireshark a packet capture of the entire connection completely passively. Very, very cool and very, very cheap to do. The manufacturer for this, NRF, as you might have guessed, the first letter N, is Nordic Semiconductor. They're the people who make these chips. So NRF Connect is a Linux app image. It is a Windows application. It is an Android app. It is a iOS app. And so it's free to install. I can probably pull it up on a phone if I have no idea where my phone went. But it is a fantastic little app, and I highly, highly recommend it for exploring around because they've actually done quite a lot of the work for initial signature sets. For Bluetooth, for a lot of these UUIDs that I talked about earlier, you can pay the Bluetooth org to reserve these UUIDs and say, I am making this UUID like the de facto, Hewlett-Packard printing device service, right? But there's also some generic ones in there for like heart rate monitors or a battery service to like measure how much battery's left. So for a lot of the generic ones, those are predefined. And so they've got a lot of those service sets. Like if you open up this app on your phone, I highly recommend you do this and just look at what's around you. Sitting in my basement, I see probably about 20 devices. A handful of them are like the TV, my PS4, the PS4 controller. and even things that you can't necessarily connect to that are still Bluetooth. You have a lot of beacons. So all of your Apple AirTags, your tile trackers, the anti-device theft, which is beaconed out from Windows machines, those have a unique fingerprint and is typically not parsable, but this app actually sees it. So if you pull open this app, what you may immediately realize is, oh my gosh, I've got like 50 things near me. And when I lived in an apartment complex where I was on the 5th floor and there's lots of people nearby, you're like, it's just saturated everywhere. There's more of this stuff than there is like Wi-Fi networks. And when you're talking about like wireless exploitation, it really is a wide open world of like, there is so much surface area to be explored, but what is available for exploration, what is available that can actually be identified and further investigated is highly ephemeral in nature. So you needed to kind of take a separate approach, which is where I went and scraped out all these APKs that connect to these devices and said, well, how do I match these up? But NRF Connect, highly recommend it. iOS, Android, go install it, hit that little start button, and it's quite fun. A fun game. I will Fox Hunt. Right beside the scan button where it labels all the devices, Fox Hunt is a very, very common like radio-esque game. You get an RSSI graph, which is, radio signal strength indicator. And so you get this nice little graph of, they say, we can't necessarily identify what this device is, but you get this nice little graph of what its signal strength is. So you can look at this constantly scrolling graph and walk around your house and say, oh, the signal's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Why is this Firewalla beaconing out Bluetooth, right? Like you're standing right over it. So zero experience, you get that nice little graph. It's like hot and cold. Go play some games and find out what in your house has Bluetooth that terrifies you. Have fun.
Marco Polo style.
Yeah. We
So
will
I
work
know-
with Overwatch to get. We'll work with Overwatch to get those in the show notes for the podcast drop.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're definitely over time. I told you that we didn't
Yep.
rein in Remy.
I am done. I could talk for hours, but yeah, that's my spiel.
We know, Remy. We know.
It's my special interest. You knew this getting into.
Yeah. I'm really glad because like this is something that I've had the privilege of watching
fun.
you work on for the past year and seeing you make a ton of progress on it, and knowing one of the main reasons why you're doing it was to try to protect humans, which is amazing because you're an amazing human as well too.
Remy's gonna start GreyNoise for Bluetooth now.
Oh,
kinda
don't
already
don't encourage him. Don't encourage him. So Emily Hemage, any more questions for Remy?
No, this is fascinating. I was so excited, and my expectations were surpassed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming and sharing this. I mean, I love getting to hear people nerd out about the things that they're really excited about, and this was exactly that. So, like, thank you for taking the time to do that.
Absolutely. I'm very, very happy to speak on it. And my day job, we analyze internet network traffic, and at night I analyze unstructured radio traffic. And I love my job.
We will also drop
propose that
Remy's.
we get Remy's
Yeah.
wife a Faraday certificate, and that probably tracks.
Yeah. So we'll get Remy's Mastodon link in the show notes as well, not that Evil Sites link. And if you want to hit him up here, it's research@greynoise.io if you want to get in touch with him directly about the research that he's been doing. So Remy, thank you for taking the time to come on again. I really appreciate it. All right, cybersecurity sleuths and digital defenders, that's a wrap on this episode of GreyNoise Stormwatch. We've taken you on a wild ride through the cyber streets of Columbus, Ohio, and danced with the blue UUID devils of Bluetooth vulnerabilities. Remember, in the world of cybersecurity, we're all just trying to keep our bits and bytes from getting bitten. As we sign off, don't forget to update your firewalls and wallas, patch your systems, and maybe give your router a little pat on the back for all its hard work. Stay vigilant out there in the digital wilderness, and remember, the only thing we have to fear is actually there's quite a lot to fear in cyberspace, so that's why we're here. Until next time, keep your passwords strong, VPNs on, and your tinfoil hats at the ready. This is the GreyNoise Stormwatch crew reminding you that in the game of cyber chess, it's always better to be the firewall than the sitting duck. Stay safe, stay secure, and stay just a little bit paranoid. Take care, everybody.